Introduction: the formula hiding in plain sight. Look at the deck in your backyard right now. Go on, picture it. That grey, cracked, sun-beaten wood that used to be golden. That fence you keep meaning to fix. That antique table your grandparents left you, the one that looks like it belongs in a dumpster instead of a dining room. What if I told you there's a formula, 3 ingredients, all of them available at any hardware store, that can bring that wood back from the dead? Not paint that hides the damage, not an expensive stain that peels off in 6 months. A penetrating solution that soaks into the wood grain itself and rebuilds it from the inside out. The total cost of materials? About $12. The cost per application? Roughly what you'd pay for a cup of coffee. Welcome back to Historia Prime, where we dig up the lost skills, forgotten survival tactics, and buried history of our ancestors. Lessons that still empower us today. This formula has been around since at least the 1930s. It appeared in household recipe books like The Chemical Formulary. Cabinet makers knew it. Shipbuilders relied on it. Your great-grandparents probably had some version of it scribbled on an index card in a kitchen drawer. So why don't you know about it? Here's the honest answer. Nobody forgot this formula because some shadowy corporation buried it. They forgot it because no one had a financial reason to remind them. You can't patent linseed oil. You can't patent vinegar. You can't build a brand monopoly around ingredients that have been public knowledge for centuries. And when you can't patent something, you can't pour millions into marketing it. So it quietly disappeared from mainstream awareness, not because it failed, but because it had no advertising budget. Today we're bringing it back. But more than the formula itself, this is a story about ancient chemistry, real survival instincts, and a terrifying safety hazard that you absolutely must understand before you try this yourself. Let's start at the very beginning. Part 1. The 10,000-year-old shield. To truly understand why this formula works, we need to travel back thousands of years, long before chemical sealants existed in any laboratory. Our ancestors had a problem. They built tools, shelters, and ships out of wood. And wood rots. Rain, sun, insects, fungus, nature is relentless. So they had to figure out how to protect it. And they found their answer in one of the oldest cultivated crops on Earth: flax. Flax was first domesticated in the Fertile Crescent in what is now the Middle East, roughly 10,000 years ago. It's one of the 8 original founder crops of civilization, right alongside wheat and barley. The ancient Egyptians wove its fibers into linen cloth so durable that archaeologists have found intact linen in tombs over 4,000 years old. When King Tutankhamun was buried, his body was wrapped in linen soaked with linseed oil, the very oil pressed from flax seeds. But it was woodworkers across the ancient world who discovered something remarkable about this golden oil. When you rub linseed oil into timber, it doesn't just sit on the surface. It soaks deep into the wood's cellular structure. And then, over days and weeks, it reacts with oxygen in the air and hardens into a flexible, protective shield inside the wood itself. This was one of the earliest wood finishes ever used in human history. For centuries across Europe, every serious craftsman relied on it. In medieval Europe, woodworkers treated cathedral doors and ship decks with linseed oil mixed with lead oxide to accelerate curing. Some of those doors are still standing centuries later. British naval vessels coated their decks with this oil before crossing the Atlantic, and the wood survived salt water, tropical sun, and brutal storms. Then, in 1860, something fascinating happened. A British inventor named Frederick Walton left a can of linseed oil open overnight in his London workshop. The next morning, he noticed a rubbery skin had formed on the surface, harder than varnish, but more flexible than lacquer. Walton realized the oil was reacting with oxygen to form a natural polymer. By 1863, he used this exact process to invent linoleum. the first mass-produced floor covering in history. Think about that. Our ancestors didn't need complex petrochemicals to build things that lasted centuries. They observed nature, they experimented, and they mastered their environment with what they had. The chemistry hasn't changed. The question is, why did we stop paying attention? Part 2. The Industrial Shift. How Convenience Replaced Craftsmanship. The answer begins in the 1940s. As the world emerged from wartime shortages, the petrochemical industry exploded. Suddenly, synthetic alkyd resins, polyurethane, and chemical varnishes flooded the market. Products like Chemtone, introduced in 1941, promised homeowners quick, easy, modern solutions. No mixing, no waiting, just open the can. And let's be fair, some of these modern products are genuinely excellent. Polyurethane, for instance, creates an incredibly hard surface that outperforms linseed oil on high-traffic floors and kitchen tables. Water-based finishes have dramatically lower fumes and VOCs. Modern chemistry has given us real advantages, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But here's what also happened. The economics changed. Linseed oil cost pennies per gallon to produce, but nobody owned it. No company could patent a natural product that humans had been using for millennia. And without a patent, there's no brand exclusivity, no profit margin worth protecting, and no marketing budget. Synthetic finishes? Those could be patented. They could be branded. And, this is the structural issue, many of them were designed to be reapplied every few years. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how incentives work. If your product needs replacing every 2 to 3 seasons, you have a repeat customer. If someone's $12 bottle of linseed oil mixture lasts them years with simple reapplication, you have nothing. Today, the US home improvement market generates over $500 billion in annual revenue. Deck refinishing alone can cost homeowners anywhere from $900 to $2,700 per project, and it's recommended every few years. Let me put that in perspective. Over 20 years, a single wooden deck behind your house could cost you nearly $7,000 in professional maintenance. Or you could learn to do it yourself for a fraction of that. Now, here's where polyurethane's weakness shows up, specifically for outdoor wood. Polyurethane sits on top of the wood grain like a rigid plastic shell. The moment the wood naturally expands or contracts with temperature changes, that plastic shell cracks. One microscopic crack lets moisture rush underneath, trapped with nowhere to go. That's exactly why polyurethane-coated decks peel, blister, and turn a dead grey within just a few seasons outdoors. Linseed oil works differently. It's inside the wood, not on top of it. It flexes with the grain. It's not perfect, it does yellow over time, and it needs periodic reapplication. But for outdoor furniture, decks, fences, and antique restoration, the old formula has serious advantages that modern marketing never bothered to tell you about. Because nobody was paying for the ad. Part 3. The Golden Trinity. 3 ingredients, centuries of science. So let's reclaim that knowledge right now. The formula consists of 3 widely available ingredients. When combined, they create a penetrating wood treatment that synthetic coatings struggle to match for this type of application. Ingredient number 1. Boiled linseed oil. Important, I said boiled. Raw linseed oil can take weeks or even months to cure, especially in humid conditions. Modern, boiled linseed oil isn't actually boiled. It contains metallic drying agents that accelerate hardening to roughly 24 to 48 hours. At a molecular level, linseed oil is a triglyceride packed with alpha-linolenic acid. When you rub it into wood, it penetrates deep into the cellular structure, much deeper than a surface-forming finish like polyurethane. Once inside, it reacts with oxygen and cross-links to form a flexible polymer network that fills the wood's pores. It expands and contracts naturally with temperature, repelling moisture from within. One important caveat: Modern, boiled linseed oil contains metallic dryers, which means it is not food safe. Do not use this formula on cutting boards, salad bowls, or anything that touches food. For food contact items, use pure raw linseed oil or food-grade mineral oil instead. Ingredient number 2, white distilled vinegar. Vinegar is essentially dilute acetic acid, one of the oldest chemicals known to humanity. In this formula, it acts as a natural cleaning solvent. When you apply the mixture to a grey, weathered deck, the acetic acid cuts through decades of grime, oxidation, and dead finish without damaging the healthy wood fibers underneath. It strips away the grey surface layer, opening the pores so the oil can flood into the freshly exposed grain. Ingredient number 3, gum turpentine. This is the key that unlocks the formula's penetrating power. Turpentine is a natural solvent distilled from the resin of pine trees, a defense mechanism the trees produce to repel insects and fungus when they're wounded. By adding turpentine, you thin the linseed oil so it penetrates deeper and cures faster. Without it, the oil tends to pool on the surface. With it, the oil soaks in within minutes. Real gum turpentine also adds natural pest and mildew resistance right into your finish. The formula: equal parts of all three. That's it. A quart of boiled linseed oil runs about $4 to $5. White vinegar is under $3. A small can of gum turpentine is about $5. Total cost for enough material to treat several large projects: roughly $12. Part 4. The deadly catch: spontaneous combustion. Now pay very close attention, because this is where history, chemistry, and survival intersect. This formula has a dark side, a terrifying, well-documented safety hazard that most DIY tutorials completely gloss over. This mixture can spontaneously combust and burn your house to the ground. I am not exaggerating. Spontaneous combustion from linseed oil is not a myth. It is not a scare tactic. It is a documented chemical reaction that has caused real disasters and real deaths. Here's the science. Remember when we talked about how linseed oil cures? It doesn't dry through evaporation like water-based paint. It dries through oxidation. The polyunsaturated fatty acids absorb oxygen from the air and harden, and that chemical reaction releases heat. It's what chemists call an exothermic reaction. When you apply the oil to a table or a deck, the heat safely dissipates into the open air. No problem. But here's the lethal scenario. You finish the job, you crumple up the oil-soaked rag you used to apply it, and you toss it into a trash can or a plastic bag. You have just created a thermal bomb. Because the rag is balled up, the heat from the oxidation has nowhere to escape. The fabric acts as insulation, trapping the thermal energy. The temperature inside that crumpled rag begins climbing. Within hours, sometimes as little as 2 to 4 hours, the internal temperature reaches the auto-ignition point. And suddenly, with no spark, no match, and no warning, the rag bursts into flames. The tragedies are documented. On February 23, 1991, workers refinishing woodwork on the 22nd floor of One Meridian Plaza in Philadelphia left a pile of linseed oil-soaked rags on the floor. Those rags spontaneously combusted. The resulting fire burned for 19 hours, destroyed 8 floors of the 38-story skyscraper, and tragically killed 3 firefighters: Captain David Holcomb, firefighter Phyllis McAllister, and firefighter James Chappell. The fire was only stopped when it reached a floor equipped with automatic sprinklers. The building was declared a total loss and demolished in 1999, all from a pile of rags. More recently, in July 2022, a recreational yacht named Pegasus caught fire at a marina in Gig Harbor, Washington. The owner and a crew member had spent the previous day refinishing wood on deck using a teak oil product containing linseed oil. The used rags were placed in a plastic bag and left under a table overnight. By 2 a.m., the yacht was engulfed in flames. The National Transportation Safety Board confirmed the cause: spontaneous combustion from improperly stored oil-soaked rags. The Pegasus, valued at $1.5 million, was a total loss. This is not optional safety advice. This is a life-or-death rule. When you finish using this formula, you must never crumple your rags. You have two safe choices. Number 1, lay the rags completely flat outdoors on a non-flammable surface like a concrete driveway and leave them until they're completely stiff and hard. Once fully cured and rigid, they're safe. Number 2, submerge the rags immediately in a metal container filled with water and seal it with a tight-fitting lid before proper disposal. Our ancestors understood how to harness nature's power, but they also respected its dangers. When we reclaim old survival skills, we must also reclaim the discipline that came with them. Part 5. How to apply it, step by step. So, now that we respect the chemistry, let's put it to work. The process is remarkably simple, requires no power tools and no professional experience. Step 1. Get a glass jar with a tight lid. Do not use plastic. Turpentine can dissolve certain plastics. Pour in 1 part boiled linseed oil, 1 part white distilled vinegar, and 1 part gum turpentine. Shake vigorously for about 30 seconds until the mixture emulsifies into a cloudy golden liquid. Step 2. With a dry brush, sweep away any loose dirt, cobwebs or debris from your target wood. No heavy sanding required. No harsh chemical stripping. No power washing. Step 3. Dip a clean cotton rag into the liquid and apply it firmly along the grain of the wood. Work in sections. If you're restoring a weathered deck, start with the most damaged board. The moment the liquid touches the wood, you'll see the acetic acid dissolve the grey oxidation layer, while the golden oil floods into the thirsty grain. The transformation is visible in seconds. Step 4. Let the first coat absorb for 10 to 15 minutes, then take a dry cloth and wipe away any excess liquid that hasn't soaked in. This is important. Leaving excess oil on the surface creates a sticky, uneven finish. Step 5. Wait 24 to 48 hours for the oil to fully polymerize inside the wood. Then apply a second coat. The second coat deepens the protective barrier and enriches the warm, natural color of the timber. A critical safety note: work in a well-ventilated area. Turpentine fumes in enclosed spaces can cause headaches, dizziness, and respiratory irritation. Open windows and doors, or better yet, work outdoors. Whether it's an antique dresser that's been drying out for decades, a pergola baking in the sun, or a hardwood floor that has lost its warmth, this formula brings wood back to life. It hydrates, it protects, it endures. Part 6. When not to use this formula. Now, I promised you honest information, so here are the limitations you need to know, because understanding when not to use something is just as valuable as knowing when to use it. Do not use this on wood that already has a polyurethane or varnish coating, unless you strip that coating completely first. The oil can't penetrate through an existing film finish. It will just sit on top and create a sticky mess. Do not use boiled linseed oil on food contact surfaces. The metallic drying agents in commercial, boiled linseed oil are not food safe. For cutting boards and serving bowls, use food-grade raw linseed oil or mineral oil instead. Do not expect forever. Linseed oil is a maintenance finish, not a one-and-done solution. Outdoor surfaces typically need a fresh coat every 1 to 3 years, depending on sun exposure and weather. But here's the beauty: reapplication is fast, cheap, and requires zero sanding. You just wipe on another coat. Do not use this on structurally compromised wood. If the wood is soft, spongy, or crumbling when you press a screwdriver into it, it's too far gone for any finish to save. Oil revives dried, weathered wood. It doesn't rebuild rotted wood. And be aware, linseed oil darkens and yellows over time. If you're working with light-colored wood like maple or birch, and you want to keep that pale tone, this formula will change the color. For those applications, a water-based finish may be the better choice. These aren't drawbacks that should scare you off. They're honest information that builds your confidence. When you know both the strengths and the limits of your tools, you make better decisions. And that's what real self-reliance looks like. Conclusion: the power in your hands. Look at that deck one more time. The one I asked you to picture at the very beginning of this video. That grey, cracked, sun-destroyed wood. It's not dead, it's just been waiting. When you mix that oil, vinegar and turpentine together this weekend, you're not just saving hundreds of dollars, you're engaging in hands-on chemistry that stretches back to the shipbuilders who crossed the Atlantic, to the medieval craftsmen who built cathedral doors that still open and close today, to the ancient Egyptians who wrapped their kings in linen soaked with this very oil. Think about that. How many skills have we quietly outsourced? How much of our everyday capability have we traded for the convenience of a branded plastic bottle? You don't need a contractor for this. You don't need a professional certification. You need $12, a glass jar, a cotton rag, and about 30 minutes of your Saturday afternoon. That's it. That's all it takes to bring a piece of wood back to life with your own hands. If this video taught you something new, if it made you look at wood differently, or made you feel a little more capable than you did 10 minutes ago, hit the subscribe button and share this with someone who's been quoted $2,000 by a contractor for something they can learn to do themselves. I'm your host, and this is Historia Prime. Stay curious, stay safe with those oil rags, and remember, the past holds the keys to our future.